So we will now begin the morning session, and it is my great pleasure to introduce my graduate advisor, David Buss, from the University of Texas in the Department of Psychology. Welcome, David.
Well, delighted to be here, and look forward to a fun day. In many ways, my talk, which is called "Why It's Bad to Be Dead," I think follows nicely on David Benatar's talk yesterday, and I have some additional reasons about why it's bad to be dead, and I think it's even worse than you think. I think David Benatar underestimates how bad it is to be dead. And I think some of the Q&A that occurred after his talk will be reflected. Some of the answers to the Q&A will be answered in my talk, I think, because what people were, I think, asking about or groping toward is, well, what about an evolutionary perspective? What about our evolved psychology that surrounds these things? And I think that those elements need to be added to get a full understanding of the picture. So now I'm going to go relatively quickly here. I've done a lot of work. All of this is in conjunction with Josh Duntley, who's a professor now, was a close collaborator of mine. And so all of this, the advantage of having a co-author is if you find any logical flaws in my talk, you will know who to blame. All right, so let's proceed. So everybody in this audience knows that evolution by selection occurs by differential reproductive success. And that's key because evolution by selection is inherently a competitive enterprise. And so what that means is that competition centers on reproductively relevant resources, be they food resources, mating resources, territory, etc., all the things that are tributary to out-reproducing competitors or from a gene's eye perspective, genes for design A outcompeting genes for design B in their replicative success. Now, what Josh Duntley and I have proposed is something we call homicide adaptation theory, which is that humans have been that humans have evolved specialized adaptations to murder other humans when they fulfill Hamilton's rule. That is, the benefits in reproductive currencies weighted by genetic relatedness outweigh the costs. And killer adaptations, we proposed, we're not just that there's one, but that there are a bunch of them that start even in utero. And there's evidence from David Haig's work and other people's work that fetuses, basically, there's mother-offspring conflict, which falls directly out of genic level thinking. And there are conditions under which it's advantageous for the mother to abort the fetus, but that fetus has just one shot in life. And so from its perspective, it wants to stay alive. And so there's mother-fetus conflict, which has resulted in the coevolution of things like preeclampsia, and the fetus is trying to grab more resources than it's in the best interest of the mother to deliver, et cetera. So this is just the start of homicide adaptations in the mother, and then anti-homicide adaptations in the fetus to prevent getting killed, and then, of course, infanticide, and then when you enter reproductive competition, et cetera, et cetera. So we propose that there are many, probably a half dozen or so, evolved homicide adaptations, some of which are very sex differentiated. So, for example, warfare. Now, hopefully get into a few of those. So these aren't just, impulse to kill, but they're psychological design for the death of other individuals. And many are closely related to mating motives. And in the books, I've written a whole book about it, The Murderer Next Door, if anyone's interested. But we go through the logic of how, in principle, if person A kills person B, it can result in a cascading set of fitness consequences where person A is going to out-reproduce person B. So in this example here, if, let's say, each person were going to have 3 offspring, hypothetically, person A kills person B before that person B can have that 3rd offspring, then that not only lops off that direct reproduction, but then that weakens that person's ability to influence the reproductive success of his or her children. And so the fitness consequences of that single death can cascade down generations and really have quite a profound effect, given certain assumptions. Now, killing is in part designed to expropriate reproductively relevant resources as well as eliminate what I call strategic interference. And there's a ton of evidence that's consistent with this. That is, I don't have one piece of evidence that I can show you that says definitively this proves humans have evolved homicide adaptations, but there's an avalanche or mountains of evidence that homicide has been a recurrent feature of human environments as far back as we have archaeological, paleontological, and written records. So I'll just very briefly mention a couple of these. There's comparative evidence. Other species do it too. Jane Goodall was originally horrified when she discovered things like infanticide in her beloved chimpanzees. And many species do it. Wolves, 50% of male wolves die by being killed by other male wolves. And so conspecific killing is very, doesn't occur in all species, but it occurs in many species. There's paleontological evidence. This was one famous case that you may remember, the Iceman, where they thought, oh, maybe he just went to sleep and died in his sleep, a peaceful death. And no, they found an arrow lodged in his scapula and blood from 3 different males that he had been combating. He lost that particular battle, and that's 5,000 years old. But the paleontological record reveals that it's primarily on male skeletons that they find these puncture wounds in the skulls and skeletons that happen coincidentally to correspond precisely to the shape of the weapons that they find at the time. So there's the paleontological evidence, there's archaeological evidence. Why would you need to build fortifications with moats, with sharpened stakes, if there weren't other people trying to come in to kill you? Why not just throw open your doors, welcome all strangers? What are these things about? Defenses from the early Neolithic, as I mentioned, palisades, baffle gates, towers, drawbridges, moats with stakes. And by the way, when they excavate the moats, they do find basically skulls and skeletons at the bottom of those moats. So some have tried to traverse the moat and failed in the process. Stone walls, pitfalls, and so forth. So there's a ton of this sort of evidence. There's ancient art, which also depicts humans killing other humans. There's cross-cultural evidence. So small group warfare has been ubiquitous. Rates of it vary, of course, so high in the Yanomamo, high in the Gabusi, but even if you go to the more, what are called the Kungsan of Botswana, who are called the harmless people, the peaceful people, etc., the death rates due to homicide are still far higher than they are in the most crime-ridden cities in the United States, such as Detroit, New York, or Los Angeles. So there's a ton of cross-cultural evidence as well. So ancient murder weapons that are designed, don't seem to be designed for hunting, but seem to be designed for killing. Maces, lances, tomahawks, daggers, swords, etc. I actually have a little, I collect not these, but ancient war weapons. I like the wooden ones. So went to New Zealand, I got a Maori war club, one of my prized possessions. I go to the Hawaiian Islands solely for research, but I have a collection of Hawaiian war clubs. And these things are made of rock hard wood, and they don't splinter or break, but they are designed to do maximum damage to other people's skulls and bodies. And then my research with Josh Duntley, we've done a ton of work on actual murderers, on homicidal ideation and the conditions that trigger homicidal ideation, and also on anti-homicidal ideation. That is, have you ever thought someone wanted to kill you? and what triggered, why did this person want to kill you? And what we find is these are very, very predictable circumstances that trigger homicidal ideation and also anti-homicidal ideation. Someone poaches on your mate. Someone impedes your status. Someone humiliates you in public. Someone steals a prized resource possession. Your partner defects from you, sexual infidelity, mate desertion. Or your partner, or someone impairs your fitness vehicle, so someone harms your children, someone rapes your daughter. Okay, these extreme fitness impairing events, these are the things that trigger people's homicidal ideation. Now, fortunately, most people don't act on their homicidal ideation, because if they did, most of us would be dead. Because what we found is that 91% of all males and 84% of females have experienced at least one fairly vivid homicidal thought in their lives. And we ask them all kinds of questions like, why did you want to kill the person? Who did you think about killing? What triggered the thought? What method did you use? And males especially go into graphic detail about what methods they. First I would break his bones, then I would puncture his lung, and then I would get smelling salts to wake him up, to let him know that I am the one who's doing the killing. They really get graphic about it. Women sometimes get graphic, but are more likely to say things like, "Oh, I would get my male friends to kill him," or I just wish he were dead. The world would be so much easier if this person would just disappear. Okay, so based on so many different data sources, which of course I can't go into in detail in this short talk, but there's no reason to be skeptical about the possible existence of these adaptations to murder. And as I said, murder has two benefits. The benefits of murder, obtaining reproductively relevant resources and eliminating sources of strategic interference. Now this is a quote from Genghis Khan, because we now have also molecular genetic evidence, but this is, I think, really captures at least warfare, homicide. The greatest pleasure is to vanquish your enemies, to chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth, to see their near and dear bathed in tears, to ride their horses and sleep on the bellies of their wives and daughters. Now he's talking about pleasure. And of course we know from the molecular data that Genghis Khan was very reproductively prolific. So he basically did vanquish other males and basically captured the females, the reproductively valuable females. And we know that something like 16 million men alive today that are in or around the former Mongolian Empire have that chromosomal signature of Genghis Khan. Now, it's very bad to be killed, and it's even worse than you think. And this is why I think David Benatar underestimates how bad it is. Annihilation, sure. Deprivation of good stuff, sure. But it's even worse than that. So one is, if you are killed, if you are dead, you lose access to your mate's her residual reproductive value, if you happen to have a mate. You lose all additional mating opportunities. So this is from a fitness perspective why it's bad to be dead. I think that's why a fitness perspective has to be added to really understand why our psychology around why we feel it's so awful to be dead. You lose all future mating opportunities, all future reproduction, totally wiped out. You can't invest in your children. I mean, we are a high parental investment species, both male and female invest heavily in their children, and we do so because it historically has had beneficial effects on their survival and on their reproductive success. With you dead, you're not around. And so what that means is that you cannot protect your children from exploitation. And we know that kids who do not have parents or have one parent dead or both are more vulnerable to exploitation of various sorts. You lose your ability to influence or arrange your kid's marriage. Historically, marriage was parents had a big say in who their kids married. And even to this day, we find in work that I did with Karen Perilou, we call it the daughter guarding hypothesis, where parents do try to influence and manipulate their daughter's mating and sexual behavior, particularly, even in the modern environment. So this isn't just ancient stuff, it occurs. But if you're dead, you can't do that. Your children risk becoming stepchildren. And we know that stepchildren are subject to deprivation, abuse, homicide. Daly and Wilson have documented that being a stepchild or having a step-parent in the home increases risk of abuse and homicide 40 to 100 times. It is the single largest risk factor of child abuse and child homicide, dwarfing all other causes. Also sexual abuse, especially stepfather, stepdaughter sexual abuse, which occurs. And so if you're dead, that is also another cost to your children. Damage to extended kin. It's not just your direct descendants, it's your extended kin. Without you, you can't protect them. Your kin group develops a reputation as more easily exploitable. You lose your ability to influence your kin's mateships, and also it can sever coalition. So when two people get married, they form a larger coalition where you have your in-laws, and the two sets of in-laws can form a larger coalition. With you dead, that can sever that, and so your entire kin coalition becomes weaker as a consequence. And then finally, to add insult to injury, your loss becomes a rival's gain. So now your partner is now having sex with and reproducing with someone else. Your material resources are being co-opted by someone else, by rivals, and because evolution by selection occurs on relative reproductive success, your loss becomes a rival's gain. So it's a kind of a double whammy, if you will. So in short, it's very, very bad to be dead. Worse than David Benatar thinks. So the basic hypothesis is that humans, because it's so bad, it's so utterly costly that humans have evolved a highly specialized psychology of anti-homicide that functions to prevent being killed under predictable circumstances. And again, this isn't just like one adaptation. So if you're a fetus, then you have one set of adaptations. Infants, stranger anxiety, I think, is another one. Interestingly enough, when does stranger anxiety emerge? Predictably at 6 months. Who are the infants afraid of? They're not afraid of women. They're afraid of strange males. So even that specificity of stranger anxiety, it's not just a random strange people, males in particular, they're worried about. And of course, this coevolutionary process. So as soon as homicide enters the mix as a strategy, that's going to immediately select for anti-homicide adaptations because it's so bad to be a victim of homicide. And so there will be this coevolutionary process where as homicide adaptations get more refined, get more sophisticated, that creates selection pressure for the anti-homicide defenses to get more refined and more sophisticated. And it's analogous to predators and prey, where for each increment in predators, that creates selection for increments in abilities of prey, and this coevolutionary process occurs within species in a perpetual sense. So I've already mentioned a couple of these. Warfare, I think, there's a ton of evidence for that. And I just want to give you one specific example of one insight, since I can't highlight all of them, but one kind of empirical surprise that occurred in the work that Josh Duntley and I did that I did not predict. And this is from our anti-homicide things, where we said, have you ever thought someone wanted to kill you? And we have about 500 responses of these from a few different cultures. And there are key triggers that are very predictable. As I mentioned, someone steals your stuff, someone's blocking your ascent in the status hierarchy, humiliates you in public, beats you up in public. These tend to be male-specific ones, has sex with your rival, or poaches your mate. But the one example I want to give has to do with error management theory. And that is, it's analogous to, Randy Nesse calls it the smoke alarm principle. It goes under different names. Marty Hazelton and I call it error management theory, where in an uncertain environment, there are two ways to err. In this case, you can err by thinking that someone's going to kill you or wants to kill you, but it turns out you're wrong. This person is your deepest friend, and the fact that they're staring at you is because they're in love with you. or you can fail to detect an actual homicidal intent that exists. And so which is the more costly error in the uncertain environment? It's, of course, to miss a homicidal intent when it's actually there. And so here's what was the surprising empirical finding that we found. In women, I thought this person would grab me, force me into the alleyway, and first rape me and then stab me with a knife. Another one, a stranger. He was driving his car and stopped to ask directions. Then he exposed himself to me. I thought he might try to kidnap me, rape me, and then kill me. A stranger. I was alone. I thought he would pull me into a corner, kill me, rape me, etc. We found a ton of these, and I hadn't predicted this. So what is this thing? Why are we getting so? And we got none from men, by the way. Why are so many women having? This is who they thought was going to kill them. And I think there are a couple different hypotheses. These don't exhaust the list, but one is an environmental mismatch. So it's possible. So in the modern environment, we know that rapes are most likely to occur by acquaintances. Date rapes, someone the person actually knows. So stranger rape is very rare in the modern environment. So one hypothesis, maybe there's a mismatch, that rape murders were more common ancestrally given small group warfare. So one group of males comes in and kills the resident males and then rapes, possibly in some cases kills the females. And so the female psychology is attuned to an ancestral environment that is mismatched with the modern environment. That's one possibility. Another possibility is an error management type thinking, that this bias motivates women to avoid the more costly error. So one can ask, well, what is in the modern environment the conditional probability of if rape then murder? And it turns out it's extremely low. So Giglieri estimates that 1 in 10,000 women who are raped will be murdered. So this linkage of rape and murder doesn't seem to be attuned to the modern environment. As I said, we found an unusual frequency of these things. And talking to women, strange males really evoke these thoughts in females, thoughts of rape, but also thoughts of rape murder, as occurred in our studies. So I think the error management logic applies here and has probably been partially responsible for the motivation of this finding. Now, once this psychology in females exists, it can then be exploited by potential rapists. So this is another one from our study. A boy raped me when I was 13, etc. And he said, if I ever told anyone, he would kill me. He whispered in my ear, if you tell anyone, I swear to God, I will kill you. So it's basically exploiting female anti-homicide psychology, in this case to carry out a rape and get away with it. So I think that, so this is just one example from our studies, that homicidal ideation surrounding sexual predation motivates women to avoid circumstances in which they risk rape, prompts women to arm themselves to prevent rape, motivates women to enlist friends and kin, basically bodyguards. Death threats sometimes succeed in carrying out a rape or silencing a rape victims, and then death threats sometimes prevent a rapist from raping. So this is another thing we found is in homicidal thoughts, did you want to kill someone? Yes, I wanted to kill my rapist or someone who is trying to rape me, and in some cases that actually succeeds in deterring. So in conclusion, I'll just say that the humans have been a key hostile force of nature for other humans. It probably won't surprise anybody with an evolutionary perspective, but I think that humans have taken it to the max in conspecific killing, especially with coalitional warfare. It's extremely costly to get killed, not just because you're dead and annihilated, and not just because you won't have some fun sexual experiences or delightful culinary experiences, but because from a fitness perspective, it has all of these multiple and very specific costs that you will incur if you get killed, and that humans have evolved anti-homicide adaptations sensitive to the predictable circumstances in which their lives are in danger. So thank you very much.
Time for questions.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, and as I said, those if you're interested, I've gone into more detail about this in the Murderer Next Door. Yeah, Randy.
To be complete, I would add that when it is good to be dead is when it is adaptive to be suicidal.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
So
sure.
in species that have adaptations for suicide, social insects and so forth, ants and so forth, and possibly humans too.
Yeah, I totally
When it
agree.
is good in the fitness sense
Yeah.
because it's adaptive to suicide.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually do talk about that in our work. So suicide, we think, is one of the homicide adaptations. And studies of suicidal ideation show that burdensomeness to kin is the key predictor or of suicidal ideation. So I think that I think it's entirely possible that suicide is an evolved homicide adaptation.
I mean, it's good to be
Yeah.
dead.
It's good for you to be dead, right, in a fitness sense.
Given your presentation, what is your hope for civilization to overcome the evolutionary tendency to kill each other?
Oh, I think we've actually done that to a large extent. So homicide rates, as Steve Pinker proves in his book, shows definitively in not the current book, but his previous book, Better Angels of Our Nature, homicide rates have been declining in almost all parts of the world over the last several hundred years. And so even in the United States, over the last couple decades, it's about 16,000 a year now, homicide rate. Suicide's about 33,000. But a couple decades ago in the United States, it was about 25,000. So even it's come down. I think what we've done is, two things. One is that we have a lot of other adaptations. So we do have adaptations to cooperate. We have our anti-homicide adaptations are very, very helpful in preventing death. We also, in the modern environment, we have modern things like we have professional police force, jails, juries, etc. that make it very costly to kill as a strategy. And moreover, the actual rates of murder would be far higher than they are due to what's called I think it's called the ambulance theory of modern medicine, that people people in the past who got attacked in the ways that they are attacked would have died. But you get an ambulance in there, get them to a hospital with modern medicine, you save a bunch of lives that would have otherwise been dead. And then also ancestrally, like in New Guinea, you get hit in the thigh with a spear. That doesn't kill you right away, but you die of an infection 2 weeks later. And so modern medicine, I think, has helped bring down the rates, as well as the professional police force and a whole bunch of other things. So I think there's a lot of hope for reducing it even more than it is now. And even in things like infanticide, so we have cultural mechanisms for adoption, for example, that prevent some women from throwing their newborns in the trash. So I don't think there's any single answer, but I think there's plenty of hope. Yeah, we have all these adaptations in us, but they're largely dormant. So even you take the most warlike people, you take the Vikings of Northern Europe, for example, and now they're Norwegians and Swedes and living in peace and harmony, at least compared to the way they used to live.
If people were actually modelling what would have happened in a primitive environment, women would be much more frightened of being raped and kidnapped than of being raped and killed.
Yes.
In fact, it was obviously not serve anyone's purpose, particularly the rapists either, to kill the woman who's raped. So why do you think women fear something which was such a biological unlikelihood? And do you think to some extent it has to do not with evolved fears, but with societal fears which are being spread through various homicide memes?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I don't have a definitive answer for that. My sentiments are very much in agreement with yours, that in terms of the paleontological record, most of what they find are male skeletons with these projectiles in them, and they find an amazing dearth of reproductive age skeletons in there. So most of the women, at least of reproductive age, probably would not have been killed. So why do women have this? So your hypothesis could be one. So in the modern environment with, the movies, people see the movies and where there is the death, or the threat of death. Another possibility is that this added fear, it is, I think, more costly on average to be killed than to be raped, even though rape is extraordinarily costly on a variety of in fitness currencies because it bypasses female choice. It causes all kinds of things. And I actually wrote an article called "The Costs of Rape." But it's possible, so one speculation might be that adding the murder to it might give additional motivational impetus to avoid being raped or avoiding the circumstances that might put a woman in danger of it. But I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer to it. I think it was one of these things that I wouldn't have predicted in advance, did not predict in advance, but it came up so frequently in our anti-homicidal ideation that I think it's worth trying to figure out what's going on. So if you have a definitive answer, I would love to hear it if anybody else does. It's one of the joys of doing research, though, is that you do top-down research starting with the theory, but then you do empirical research and discover things that you didn't know existed that require some kind of explanation. So,
one possibility of why women have been killed after being raped is that they'll be killed by their husband's kin.
yeah, I guess that would be another one.
You mentioned infanticide. What's the adaptive value of infanticide with your own children?
Oh, well, first of all, some of the infanticide is not of your own children, so it's like a stepdad comes in. But if the woman is, the two best predictors are if the woman is young, so if she's 17 and has many future years ahead of her, does not have an investing father, and so the prospects, or at least ancestrally, the prospects of survival and a good, thriving, high reproductive value child are low compared to basically minimizing your costs, minimizing your investment, and investing more in future offspring. And I think that's actually what abortion is like. So spontaneous, so-called spontaneous abortion, where they used to think, there are so many cases of women, they think, oh, I missed my period, I must be pregnant, and then it turns out, oh, no, they're not pregnant. Many of these turn out to be designed abortions. So I think mothers have adaptations to assess the genetic quality of the kid as well as the circumstances, her own resource circumstances, such as an investing father. And so under certain circumstances, it can be advantageous to kill your own kids. And infanticide it's a universal, occurs in all cultures. And the conditions under which it occurs are very predictable. Well, you're minimizing an investment in a vehicle that's not going to do very well. So it's the same thing as you're pregnant for a while, assess the genetic quality of the kids is very poor, spontaneously abort, and then in order to preserve investment for a future reproductive opportunity.
Improving chances for future reproductive success.
Yeah. I mean, people are horrified by it, and I don't think that accounts for all cases. I mean, you do get, like the Andrea Yates case, or you get mothers who kill, in her case, 5 kids. I mean, I think some of these are simple pathologies. So I don't think that an adaptationist account can explain all of these, but it can explain the predictable circumstances in which infanticide occurs across cultures.
Sort of on related lines, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the adaptive explanation for murder, because if it really is bad to be dead, which I'm not doubting, if it is bad to be dead, why do people put themselves in situations where they're going to increase the chance of being dead, right? So if people are murdering, that's an extremely high potential cost, right? Because people likely are going to fight back. So why put yourself in that situation? and there's a couple of possible explanations, right? One is that the benefits outweigh the costs. Another is that murder is actually the byproduct of seeking those benefits, right? I mean, the ambulance idea you mentioned suggests that a lot of these deaths that are happening are not intentional, or people are not following through on them to the point where people are becoming murdered. And if we just do a thought experiment across cultures, if people are in situations where the costs are extremely low for murder, do they always murder? And so I'm just sort of wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this idea of, the evidence for the adaptive explanation.
Oh, yeah. Well, I went through some of the sources of evidence. I think that, of course, murdering is not, and never has been, adaptive in all circumstances. It occurs, I think, to take the case of warfare, when does warfare occur? Basically, when you have established a coalition that can vanquish the opposing coalition, and done so by recruiting a large N to your coalition, because in small group warfare, it's relative N that decides who's going to be the victor for the most part. It's the single best predictor. And so people generally kill in circumstances where the costs are low. Now, that's why I said in the modern environment, though, with modern forensics, DNA fingerprinting, jails, an entire professional police force, none of which we had ancestrally, that is going to make it much more costly to do. And I think that's in part why the rates of homicide have gone down so much. But when we get to, well, what is the specific evidence? What we have to do is go through the hypothesized homicide adaptations one by one and look at them specifically. So the evidence for the the fetus not getting killed, or adaptations for the mother to spontaneously abort a genetically not great fetus, that's going to be different sorts of evidence for warfare adaptations, or male-male intrasexual rivalry homicides. So we have to do it on a case-by-case basis. I try to do as much as I can in the book, The Murderer Next Door, but I think it's as I said, it's not a knockdown definitive thing. I think that the evidence is sufficiently strong that it is that the odds of us not having homicide adaptations and anti-homicide defenses is as close to zero as you can get. And I think over the next decade or so, more and more evidence, and even since I started doing work on this, the paleontological evidence has accumulated, the DNA evidence has accumulated, and like massive displacement. So Genghis Khan was just one example, but they're finding many others where it's basically the males are coming in and displacing the other males, and the female mitochondrial DNA is remaining in place. And so the convergence of evidence across so many different sources, I think, is what's going to be the ultimate arbiter.
Okay, well, thank you so much, David Buss. Thank you.
Thank you.